13-year-old Maribelle sat motionless in her wheelchair, surrounded by music, laughter, and complete silence. Not one guest at the wedding noticed her. Not one person spoke to her. Her father, once a powerful tech CEO, stood across the lawn, haunted, broken, unable to fix what the accident had taken. Then, a single dad arrived late, mud on his boots, his little boy tugging at his hand. He stopped, looked straight at her, and said the words no one else had, "Why is she alone?" That moment didn't just change the wedding. It sparked a miracle no one saw coming. Have you ever felt alone in a room full of people? If you have, then this story is for you. Because what happened that day in Winthrop Hollow proves that it's not money, power, or perfect timing that changes lives. Sometimes, it's just a quiet act of kindness, from a total stranger. Before we continue, tell us, where in the world are you tuning in from? We love seeing how far our stories travel. Cohen Whitlock had once been a name whispered in Silicon Valley boardrooms with a mixture of reverence and envy. At 32, he had transformed a small software firm operating out of a cramped Seattle garage into a global enterprise worth billions. His company, Nexus Technologies, revolutionized cloud computing infrastructure, making him one of the youngest CEOs to grace the cover of Fortune magazine. He was brilliant, driven, and utterly relentless in his pursuit of innovation. Board meetings were legendary affairs where Cohen would pace the room, sketching algorithms on whiteboards while speaking 3 languages fluently to international partners. His mind processed information like a supercomputer, seeing patterns and possibilities that eluded even his most talented engineers. But beneath the razor-sharp business acumen lived a man who had waited 13 years for the greatest miracle of his life. Maribelle had been born after years of heartbreak and medical consultations that left Cohen and his wife Sarah emotionally drained. They had endured 7 miscarriages, each loss carving deeper wounds in their marriage and their hearts. Sarah had wanted to stop trying. The pain was too much, the hope too fragile. But then, against all odds, Maribelle arrived. She entered the world with soft auburn curls that caught sunlight like spun copper and eyes the color of mountain sage. From her first breath, she radiated a joy so pure it seemed to transform everyone who encountered her. She danced before she walked, her tiny body swaying to music only she could hear. She sang before she spoke coherently, humming lullabies that she somehow composed in her sleep. Maribelle possessed the rare gift of making strangers feel like old friends within minutes. At grocery stores, she would wave at elderly shoppers until they smiled. At restaurants, she would compliment servers on their shoes or ask them about their favorite colors. She turned mundane errands into adventures, supermarket aisles into dance floors, and waiting rooms into stages for impromptu performances. Cohen, despite his demanding schedule, never missed a school play, dance recital, or bedtime story. He would sit cross-legged on her bedroom floor, listening to tales about dragons who preferred tea parties to treasure hoarding, and princesses who solved problems with kindness instead of magic wands. "Daddy," she would say, her small hand tracing patterns on his palm, "when I grow up, I want to help people smile like you help people with computers." Those words would echo in his mind during the darkest days to come. The accident happened on a rainy September night that started like any other business trip. Cohen had flown to Spokane for a crucial merger negotiation that could expand Nexus Technologies into the European market. Sarah was visiting her sister in Portland, so Maribelle had begged to come along. "Please, Daddy? I promise I'll be quiet during your meetings. I'll bring my sketchbook and draw you pictures of success." How could he say no to that? The meetings had gone better than expected. The European partners were impressed with Nexus's latest security protocols, and contracts were signed ahead of schedule. Cohen was in an unusually celebratory mood as they left the downtown office building, rain pattering against the windows of their rental car. "Can we stop at that bookstore we passed?" Maribelle asked, pressing her face against the passenger window. "I saw they have new books about art. I want to learn how to draw horses that look real." It was such a simple request. A 5-minute detour to feed his daughter's curiosity and creativity. That detour changed everything. The intersection of 3rd Avenue and Division Street was busier than usual for a Tuesday evening. Cohen stopped at the red light, drumming his fingers on the steering wheel while Maribelle chatted about the horses she planned to draw. The rain had intensified, turning the windshield into a canvas of fractured light. He never saw the truck coming. The 18-wheeler had been traveling too fast for the slick conditions. Its driver, later investigation would reveal, had been behind the wheel for 14 hours straight, fighting microsleep and running on caffeine and determination to make his delivery deadline. When his rig began to skid on the rain-slicked asphalt, he overcorrected, sending 20 tons of steel and cargo spinning through the red light like a massive, deadly pendulum. The impact was devastating. Cohen's side of the car absorbed most of the collision force. The driver's side airbag deployed, creating a protective cocoon that saved his life with nothing more than a concussion and fractured ribs. But the passenger side crumpled like paper, and Maribelle's smaller body absorbed the crushing weight of twisted metal and shattered dreams. The sound of sirens would haunt Cohen's sleep for months afterward. At Sacred Heart Hospital, a neurosurgeon named Dr. Martinez delivered the news that no parent should ever hear. Maribelle's spinal cord had been severely damaged at the L2 vertebra. The technical term was complete spinal cord injury, which meant the chances of her ever walking again were virtually non-existent. "We've stabilized her condition," Dr. Martinez explained, his voice gentle but unwavering. "The surgery went as well as we could hope. But I need you to understand the reality of her injury. The damage to her spinal cord is extensive. Her legs will not regain function." Cohen sat in the hospital chair, still wearing clothes stained with his daughter's blood, trying to process words that felt like foreign language. Complete spinal cord injury. Paralyzed. Wheelchair. Rehabilitation. Adaptation. None of it made sense. This was Maribelle, the girl who danced in grocery stores and climbed trees like a fearless explorer. How could legs that had carried her through life with such grace and joy suddenly become silent, still, unresponsive? For the first 3 weeks, Maribelle didn't speak. She lay in the hospital bed, staring at the ceiling tiles, her once bright eyes now clouded with confusion and pain. Nurses tried to engage her with coloring books and gentle conversation, but she remained locked inside herself, processing a reality too overwhelming for her 13-year-old mind to fully comprehend. When she finally spoke, it was with one word that shattered Cohen's heart into a million irreparable pieces. "Why?" She asked it repeatedly, in different ways, at different times of day. Why did this happen? Why couldn't the doctors fix her? Why couldn't she feel her legs? Why couldn't she dance anymore? Why did God let bad things happen to good people? Cohen never had an answer. He tried explaining about accidents and random chance and how sometimes terrible things happen to wonderful people for no reason at all. But how do you explain the inexplicable to a child who had always believed that kindness was rewarded and dreams came true for those who wished hard enough? Watching his daughter's spirit dim was more painful than any physical injury he had sustained. The girl who once turned strangers into friends now barely acknowledged visitors. Family members would arrive with flowers and gentle smiles, but Maribelle would turn her face toward the wall, retreating into a silence that felt impenetrable. Cohen's empire, built over decades of relentless work and visionary leadership, began to crumble from neglect. Board meetings were cancelled or conducted via phone from hospital corridors. International partners grew concerned about Nexus Technologies' future stability. Stock prices fluctuated as rumors spread about the CEO's indefinite absence. He didn't care. The man who had once orchestrated billion-dollar mergers now spent his days learning about wheelchair accessibility, physical therapy protocols, and adaptive equipment. His phone buzzed constantly with messages from business associates, but he ignored them all. His assistant, Maria, fielded calls from reporters and shareholders while Cohen focused entirely on his daughter's care. The corporate world that had once consumed his every waking thought felt trivial compared to the simple goal of seeing Maribelle smile again. After 2 months in the hospital and rehabilitation center, they returned to Cohen's mountain estate on the outskirts of Winthrop Hollow. The house, a sprawling timber and stone structure overlooking Pine Lake, had been hastily renovated to accommodate a wheelchair. Ramps replaced steps, doorways were widened, and a state-of-the-art accessible bathroom was installed adjacent to Maribelle's bedroom. But physical accessibility couldn't address the emotional barriers that seemed to grow higher each day. Maribelle spent most of her time in her room, staring out the window at the lake where she had once swum with fearless joy. She showed little interest in the tutors Cohen hired, barely touched the art supplies he brought her, and remained silent during visits from child psychologists who specialized in trauma recovery. The house felt haunted by echoes of laughter that no longer existed. Cohen had become a different man entirely. The confident CEO who had commanded boardrooms with natural authority now moved through life tentatively, as if afraid that any decision might cause additional harm. He second-guessed every choice, from what to serve for breakfast to whether encouraging Maribelle to try physical therapy was pushing too hard or not hard enough. He blamed himself for every shattered dream, every tear she cried in the darkness of her room, every moment of joy that seemed permanently lost. Months passed in this haze of grief and guilt. Nexus Technologies continued operating under the guidance of the board of directors, but everyone knew the company was drifting without its visionary leader. Competitors began circling, sensing weakness and opportunity. Industry publications ran speculative articles about potential acquisitions and leadership changes. Cohen remained oblivious to the corporate drama. His world had contracted to the size of his daughter's experience, and that world felt smaller and darker each day. Then Dane's wedding invitation arrived. Dane Whitlock, Cohen's younger brother by 5 years, had always been the family's free spirit. Where Cohen built technological empires, Dane built custom furniture with his hands. Where Cohen navigated corporate hierarchies, Dane preferred mountain trails and woodworking shops. He lived simply in a cabin he had constructed himself, surrounded by pine forests and the kind of peace that money couldn't purchase. The wedding invitation was hand-carved on birch bark, vintage Dane style. He was marrying Rebecca, a local teacher who shared his love of sustainable living and handcrafted everything. The ceremony would be held in Winthrop Hollow's community garden, followed by a reception featuring locally sourced food and music from regional folk artists. "Please come," Dane had written in a personal note attached to the invitation. "I know things have been difficult, but family needs family, especially during celebrations. Rebecca would love to meet Maribelle, and I think some joy might be good medicine for all of us." Cohen's first instinct was to decline politely. The thought of exposing Maribelle to crowds, questions, and well-meaning but awkward interactions felt overwhelming. People would stare. They would whisper. They would offer condolences and inspirational platitudes that felt hollow and painful. But when he mentioned the invitation to Maribelle during one of their quiet dinner conversations, her response surprised him. "I want to wear the purple dress," she said softly, not looking up from her barely touched meal. "The one Aunt Jo made me before everything." It was the first time in months that she had expressed a preference about anything beyond medical necessities. Cohen felt a spark of something he had almost forgotten how to recognize: hope. "Are you sure you want to go?" he asked gently. "There will be a lot of people there. It might be overwhelming." Maribelle finally looked at him, and for a moment, he saw a flicker of the girl who had once lit up every room she entered. "I want to try," she whispered. Those 4 words felt like a miracle. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and warm, with the kind of golden light that made everything in Winthrop Hollow look touched by magic. Cohen helped Maribelle into the purple dress with infinite care, his hands trembling slightly as he worked with the delicate fabric. Her hair, which had grown longer during the months of recovery, was braided by a professional stylist who came to the house. Looking at his daughter in the morning sunlight, Cohen was struck by how beautiful she remained. The accident had changed so much, but it hadn't dimmed her inherent grace or the sweetness that radiated from her presence. The purple dress complemented her auburn hair perfectly, and for a moment, she looked like the princess from one of her beloved fairy tale books. "You look absolutely stunning," he told her, meaning every word. Maribelle smiled, genuinely smiled, for the first time in months. The drive to the community garden took 20 minutes through winding country roads lined with wildflowers and split-rail fences. Cohen drove carefully, acutely aware of his precious cargo and the significance of this journey. This was Maribelle's first public appearance since the accident, her first attempt to engage with the world beyond their protected bubble of grief and healing. The wedding venue was everything Dane had promised. The community garden had been transformed into an enchanted outdoor cathedral, with wooden arches covered in climbing roses and strings of lights that would illuminate the evening celebration. It was rustic, authentic, and utterly beautiful. Cohen carefully transferred Maribelle from the car to her wheelchair, a process they had practiced dozens of times but which still felt emotionally charged in this public setting. She wore a small corsage of purple violets that matched her dress, and carried a beaded purse that contained her sketch pad and colored pencils, tools she hadn't used in months but had decided to bring just in case. As they approached the garden entrance, Cohen felt his protective instincts surge. He wanted to shield Maribelle from every curious glance, every whispered comment, every well-intentioned but potentially painful interaction. But she had asked to come, had chosen to wear the purple dress, had decided to try engaging with the world again. He had to let her try. The ceremony itself was lovely and mercifully brief. Dane and Rebecca exchanged vows they had written themselves, speaking about partnership, adventure, and building a life rooted in love and respect for the natural world. Their words were genuine and heartfelt, free from pretension or theatrical flourishes. Maribelle watched from her wheelchair in the back row, occasionally sketching flowers or interesting faces in her pad. She seemed calm, even peaceful, surrounded by the garden's natural beauty and the gentle energy of the celebration. But after the ceremony ended and the reception began, the real challenges started. People began approaching with the awkward uncertainty that often accompanies encounters with visible disability. They meant well, Cohen knew that, but their discomfort was palpable. Conversations would begin with forced brightness before trailing off into uncomfortable silence. Adults would smile nervously and make generic comments about how brave Maribelle was, as if simply existing in a wheelchair required extraordinary courage. Children were called away by parents who worried about inappropriate questions or uncomfortable situations. The elderly family members would pat Maribelle's shoulder gently and speak in hushed tones about God's plan, and everything happening for a reason, phrases that felt like sandpaper against raw wounds. Most painful of all were the conversations that flowed around Maribelle but never included her directly. Adults would speak to Cohen about her condition, her progress, her future, as if she weren't sitting right there listening to every word. They discussed her medical care, her schooling, her adjustment to her new reality, always referring to her in third person, even when addressing topics that directly concerned her life and feelings. Maribelle became invisible in plain sight. Cohen watched his daughter's face gradually close off as the reception progressed. The tentative smile that had appeared during the ceremony faded into resigned silence. She retreated into herself, becoming smaller somehow, despite taking up the same physical space. He wheeled her to a quiet spot beneath an old oak tree at the edge of the garden, away from the main crowd but still within sight of the celebration. From this vantage point, they could observe the dancing, the laughter, the easy social interactions that seemed to flow effortlessly between people who moved through the world without wheels or medical equipment. Maribelle watched other children her age running between tables, playing games on the lawn, forming the kind of spontaneous friendships that only happen at family gatherings. Her hands rested motionless in her lap, her sketch pad forgotten, her expression reflecting a loneliness so profound it made Cohen's chest tighten with helpless anger. This was what they had feared. This was why leaving the safety of their home felt so dangerous. Not because the world was cruel, but because the world didn't know how to see his daughter as anything more than her disability. To them, she wasn't Maribelle who loved dragons and painted watercolor horses. She was the girl in the wheelchair, defined entirely by her limitations rather than her limitless heart and imagination. "Do you want to go home?" Cohen asked quietly, prepared to leave immediately if she requested it. Maribelle shook her head, but her eyes remained fixed on the dancers twirling across the makeshift dance floor. "Not yet," she whispered. So they stayed, two isolated figures beneath the oak tree, watching a celebration that felt increasingly foreign and inaccessible. That's when everything changed. The voice that broke through the background noise of the reception wasn't loud or demanding attention. It was curious, genuine, and directed not at Cohen but at the situation itself. "Why is she alone?" The question came from a man Cohen didn't recognize, someone who clearly wasn't part of the Whitlock family circle. He was approaching 40, with prematurely gray hair and hands marked by honest work. His clothes, dark jeans and a pressed white shirt, were clean and appropriate but obviously off the rack, lacking the designer labels and custom tailoring favored by most of the wedding guests. Beside him walked a boy of about 8, with the same gray eyes and an expression of open curiosity rather than the cautious uncertainty Cohen had grown accustomed to seeing in children who encountered Maribelle. The man's question hadn't been directed at anyone in particular, but it carried a tone of genuine puzzlement, as if he couldn't understand why a child would be sitting by herself during a celebration designed to bring people together. He approached their tree with the confident stride of someone comfortable in his own skin, unbothered by social hierarchies or the invisible barriers that seemed to separate those who belonged from those who merely observed. "Hi there," he said, addressing Maribelle directly with the same tone he might use with any child at any gathering. "I'm Elian, and this is my son Josiah. We're running a bit late to this party, but it looks like we haven't missed the important parts." Maribelle looked up, startled by being addressed so naturally, so normally. "You look really cool in that dress." Josiah added with the kind of sincere compliment that only children can deliver without artifice. "Purple is my favorite color for special occasions." For the first time in hours, Maribelle smiled. Not the polite, careful smile she had worn during awkward adult interactions, but the genuine expression of pleased surprise that had once been her default response to the world. "Thank you," she said softly. "I like your shirt. It's very crisp." Elian laughed, a warm sound that somehow made the space beneath the oak tree feel more welcoming. "My grandmother always said a man should own at least one shirt that could handle weddings and job interviews. This is that shirt." "Mind if we sit here with you for a while?" he asked, but he was already settling onto the grass beside Maribelle's wheelchair, his son following suit. "The music is nice, but sometimes the best part of weddings is watching everyone else have fun." Cohen found himself studying this stranger who had approached them with such easy confidence. Elian Carter, he had introduced himself, though Cohen didn't remember the name from Dane's guest list. He carried himself with the kind of quiet strength that came from physical work and practical problem-solving, and his interaction with Maribelle felt refreshingly free from the pity or awkwardness that had characterized most of their encounters that day. "Are you family?" Cohen asked, trying to place this man who seemed so comfortable in a gathering where he was clearly a social outsider. "Not exactly," Elian replied. "I did some custom carpentry work for Dane's cabin last winter, built-in bookshelves and a dining table. He mentioned the wedding a few weeks ago and said I should come if I wanted to. Seemed like a nice way to spend a Saturday afternoon." It was such a simple explanation, but it revealed something important about both Dane's character and Elian's. His brother had invited someone based on craftsmanship and character rather than social status or family obligation. And Elian had accepted the invitation with the kind of openness that suggested he was comfortable navigating unfamiliar social terrain. "What kind of books do you like?" Josiah asked Maribelle, apparently unconcerned with adult conversation dynamics. "Dad and I have been reading this series about kids who can talk to animals. It's pretty awesome." Maribelle's face lit up with an enthusiasm Cohen hadn't seen in months. "I love books about dragons," she said. "Not the scary kind that burn down villages, but the ones that are misunderstood and just want friends." "Oh, those are the best kind," Josiah agreed seriously. "The scary dragons are boring. Anyone can be mean and breathe fire. It takes imagination to make dragons that are different." As the children continued their conversation about literary preferences, Cohen found himself talking with Elian about carpentry, small-town life, and the challenges of single parenthood. Elian was a widower, he learned, raising Josiah alone since his wife died of cancer 3 years earlier. He spoke about loss with the kind of matter-of-fact acceptance that comes from walking through grief and emerging on the other side. "The hardest part isn't missing her," Elian said quietly, watching his son animate a story about dragon friendships. "It's knowing that Josiah is growing up without her wisdom and gentleness. I can teach him to swing a hammer and change a tire, but she would have taught him how to understand people's hearts." Cohen felt something shift in his chest, recognition, perhaps, or the relief of talking to someone who understood that loving a child meant carrying fears and responsibilities that sometimes felt overwhelming. "You seem to be doing a pretty good job with the heart part," Cohen observed, watching Josiah listen to Maribelle with the kind of focused attention that made her words feel important and valued. "He teaches me as much as I teach him," Elian replied. "Kids have this natural way of seeing what matters and ignoring what doesn't. Adults complicate everything." As if to illustrate his point, Josiah suddenly jumped up from the grass with an expression of delighted discovery. "Dad, can I get Maribelle one of those cupcakes? The ones with the extra sprinkles? They make everything taste like celebration." Before anyone could object, he was racing toward the dessert table with the determined focus of a child on a mission of kindness. "He believes sprinkles have magical properties," Elian explained with a grin. Not entirely convinced he's wrong. When Josiah returned with 2 cupcakes, one for Maribelle and one for himself, he presented hers with the ceremony of a diplomatic gift exchange. "This one has the most sprinkles," he announced proudly. "I counted. 4 to 7 rainbow ones and 12 chocolate ones. That's definitely enough magic for a whole day." Maribelle accepted the cupcake with a genuine laugh, the first one Cohen had heard since before the accident. The sound was so unexpected, so purely joyful, that he felt tears threaten to overwhelm him. "Thank you," she said to Josiah. "I think you might be right about the magic." As they ate their cupcakes, the music from the reception shifted to something slower and more melodic. Couples began moving onto the makeshift dance floor, swaying together under the string lights that had begun to twinkle in the approaching dusk. Maribelle watched the dancers with an expression that mixed longing and resignation. This was the part of celebrations that felt most distant from her current reality, the physical joy of movement, the partnership of dance, the embodied expression of happiness that seemed forever beyond her reach. Cohen was preparing to suggest they leave, to spare her the pain of watching what she could no longer participate in, when Elian stood up and brushed grass from his jeans. "Maribelle," he said with the kind of casual confidence that suggested he had been thinking about this for a while. "Would you like to dance with us? We can spin you around in your chair, if that sounds fun. Josiah and I aren't exactly professional dancers, but we're enthusiastic." The offer was so unexpected, so naturally presented, that for a moment everyone fell silent. No one had asked Maribelle to dance since the accident. No one had even suggested that dancing was something she could still participate in, despite her changed circumstances. The assumption seemed to be that physical limitations meant the end of physical joy, that wheels meant the cessation of rhythm and movement. But Elian saw possibilities where others saw only limitations. Is that okay? He asked Cohen, recognizing that parental permission was both practically and emotionally necessary. Cohen looked at his daughter, whose face had transformed with something that looked dangerously close to hope. What do you think, Belle? He asked, using the nickname he hadn't spoken in months. Would you like to try dancing? Her nod was barely perceptible, but it was definitive. What happened next would become one of those moments that divide time into before and after, the kind of experience that reshapes understanding and opens doorways that previously seemed sealed forever. Elian positioned himself behind Maribelle's wheelchair while Josiah stood beside her, taking her hand with the natural gallantry of a child who hadn't yet learned that some situations required awkwardness or hesitation. Together, they began to move in time with the music, not traditional dancing, but something entirely their own. Elian guided the wheelchair in gentle circles and figure eights, creating the sensation of gliding across the dance floor. Josiah skipped and twirled around them, occasionally spinning under Maribelle's outstretched arm or pretending to waltz with an invisible partner. All three of them were laughing, caught up in the simple joy of movement and music and shared experience. For the first time since the accident, Maribelle was dancing. Not in the way she had danced before, with legs that carried her across floors with effortless grace, but in a new way that incorporated her chair as a partner rather than an obstacle. Her upper body swayed with the rhythm, her arms moved expressively, and her face radiated the kind of pure happiness that comes from feeling fully alive and present in a moment. Other wedding guests began to notice. The change in energy was palpable as people turned to watch this unexpected trio creating their own version of celebration. But instead of the uncomfortable stares or pitying glances that had characterized earlier interactions, something different was happening. A little girl tugged on her mother's dress and asked, "Can I go dance with the girl in the chair?" Her mother, after a moment of hesitation, nodded. Then two boys around Josiah's age approached and asked if they could join in. Within minutes, Maribelle was at the center of a spontaneous dance party that included children of various ages, all moving together in the kind of unstructured, joyful way that only happens when barriers dissolve and possibilities expand. The adults watched in amazement as their children instinctively created an inclusive celebration that hadn't existed moments before. There were no rules or choreography, just music and laughter and the magical alchemy that occurs when differences become irrelevant and shared humanity takes precedence. Maribelle was no longer the girl in the wheelchair watching from the sidelines. She was the dancer who happened to use wheels, the friend who brought something special to the circle, the young person whose joy was infectious and whose presence made the celebration more complete. Cohen stood at the edge of the dance area, tears flowing freely down his cheeks as he watched his daughter shine with a light he had feared was permanently extinguished. This was more than dancing. This was resurrection, transformation, proof that joy could survive even the most devastating circumstances if given the right environment to flourish. The song ended, but the children remained clustered around Maribelle, chattering excitedly about the fun they had shared and asking if they could dance together again. For the first time in months, she was surrounded by peers who saw her as a friend rather than a medical condition, who included her naturally rather than awkwardly, who treated her wheelchair as simply another part of who she was rather than the defining characteristic of her identity. As the group gradually dispersed to rejoin their families, Elian approached Cohen with the kind of quiet satisfaction that comes from having done something right without making a big production of it. "Thank you," Cohen said, his voice thick with emotion he didn't try to hide. "You did something today that I couldn't figure out how to do. You gave her back a piece of herself." Elian shook his head with characteristic humility. "I didn't give her anything. She just needed someone to see her instead of her situation. Your daughter is remarkable, funny, smart, kind. The wheelchair is just how she gets around." It was such a simple observation, but it contained a profound truth that Cohen had somehow lost in the months of medical appointments and accessibility modifications and grief counseling. In focusing so intently on Maribelle's disability and its implications, he had gradually stopped seeing the whole person who remained vibrant and valuable and entirely herself, regardless of how her body moved through the world. "You're a single dad too," Elian continued. "It's the hardest job in the world, and you're doing it under circumstances that would break most people. But she's going to be okay. Different than you planned, maybe, but okay. More than okay." As families began gathering their belongings and preparing to leave, Elian pulled a business card from his wallet, simple white cardstock with his name, phone number, and custom carpentry printed in forest green ink. "If you ever want to talk," he said, "or if Maribelle wants to hang out with Josiah, would enjoy that. We live about 20 minutes from here, in Kettle Ridge. Nothing fancy, but always room for friends." Cohen accepted the card with the feeling that he was being offered something much more valuable than professional services or casual social contact. He was being offered community, connection, the possibility of relationships that weren't defined by tragedy or pity but by mutual interest and genuine affection. The drive home was markedly different from the morning journey. Maribelle chatted about the wedding, the dancing, the children she had met, the delicious cupcakes with magical sprinkles. Her energy was animated in a way Cohen hadn't witnessed since before the accident, as if some essential part of her had been reawakened by the afternoon's experiences. Josiah said they're reading books about kids who can talk to animals, she said as they wound through the country roads back to their mountain estate. Do you think we could get those books? I want to see if they have any dragons in them. It was such a simple request, but Cohen recognized it as monumentally significant. For months, Maribelle had shown little interest in reading, art, or any of the activities that had once brought her joy. Now she was asking for books, expressing curiosity about new stories, engaging with the world in ways that suggested healing was not only possible but actively occurring. We'll order them first thing Monday morning, he promised. And maybe we could invite Josiah and his father over sometime, if you'd like. They seem like the kind of people who would enjoy our lake. Maribelle's smile was radiant. I would like that very much. That night, for the first time since the accident, she asked if they could sit on the back deck overlooking Pine Lake and look at the stars together. It had been one of their favorite pre-accident traditions, father and daughter sharing quiet conversations under the vast Idaho sky, making up constellations and telling stories about the lives of stars. As they sat together in the cool mountain air, Maribelle wrapped in a soft blanket and Cohen in the wooden chair he had pulled beside her wheelchair, something fundamental had shifted between them. The weight of guilt and grief that had pressed down on their relationship for months felt lighter somehow, not erased but no longer crushing. Daddy, Maribelle said softly, her eyes fixed on the constellation Orion hanging low over the lake, I had fun today. Real fun. I forgot what that felt like. Cohen reached over and took her hand, feeling the warmth of her fingers and the steady pulse that reminded him that his daughter was alive, healing, and gradually finding her way back to joy. I'm glad, he said simply. You deserve to have fun. You deserve to dance and laugh and make friends who see how wonderful you are. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the gentle lap of lake water against the shoreline and the distant call of a loon somewhere across the water. The stars reflected on the lake's surface like scattered diamonds, creating a scene of almost magical beauty. Do you think we could call Elian tomorrow? Maribelle asked eventually. I want to thank him properly for asking me to dance. And I want to know more about those books Josiah mentioned. I think that's a wonderful idea, Cohen replied, already planning to make that call first thing in the morning. The friendship that developed between the Whitlocks and the Carters unfolded with the natural ease of relationships built on genuine affection rather than obligation or circumstance. Elian and Josiah began visiting the mountain estate regularly, and their presence brought a warmth and energy that had been missing since the accident. Elian possessed the rare gift of treating Maribelle exactly as he would treat any 13-year-old girl, neither coddling her because of her disability nor ignoring the practical realities of her situation. He asked her opinions about everything from the best way to organize a workshop to whether pine or oak made better bookshelves. He brought her small projects to work on, simple woodworking tasks that could be accomplished from a seated position, and celebrated her successes with the same enthusiasm he showed for Josiah's achievements. More importantly, he helped Cohen remember how to be a father rather than just a caregiver. You're trying so hard to fix everything that you've forgotten to just enjoy her, Elian observed one afternoon as they watched Maribelle and Josiah collaborate on building a birdhouse designed to attract the blue jays that frequented the lake shore. She doesn't need you to make her walk again. She needs you to see that she's still the same remarkable kid she always was. It was a gentle correction, delivered without judgment, but it hit Cohen with the force of revelation. In his desperate attempt to help Maribelle adjust to her new reality, he had inadvertently communicated that her current self was somehow insufficient. That healing meant returning to who she had been rather than discovering who she was becoming. Josiah, with the uncomplicated wisdom of childhood, had immediately grasped something that the adults were still learning. He never asked Maribelle about her accident or expressed pity about her situation. Instead, he included her in adventures, sought her advice on important 8-year-old dilemmas, and treated her wheelchair as simply another interesting feature of their friendship. Like the fact that he was good at climbing trees and she was better at remembering the plots of complicated books. Maribelle is my best friend, he announced to his father one evening after a particularly successful day of fort building and storytelling. She's really smart and funny, and she knows more about dragons than anyone else in the world. The books about children who could communicate with animals became the foundation for elaborate collaborative stories that Maribelle and Josiah created together. She would write and illustrate the adventures while he acted out the various animal characters, their imagination transforming the lake house into a magical realm where anything was possible. For the first time since the accident, Maribelle began asking about returning to school. "I want to see my friends," she told Cohen one morning over breakfast. "I want to show them the stories I've been writing with Josiah. And I miss learning new things." The conversation about school re-entry was complex and emotional, involving meetings with administrators, teachers, and therapists to ensure that Maribelle would receive appropriate support and accommodations. But her desire to reconnect with her educational community felt like another step toward reclaiming her full life rather than merely existing within the limitations imposed by her accident. Cohen found himself thinking differently about many things as he watched his daughter's gradual emergence from the shell of grief and withdrawal that had enclosed her for so many months. The guilt that had consumed him began to transform into something more productive. Not the elimination of regret, but the channeling of it into purposeful action. He began researching assistive technology for children with spinal cord injuries, not as a desperate attempt to cure Maribelle's condition, but as a way to ensure that other families facing similar challenges would have access to resources and support that could facilitate healing and adaptation. The idea that would eventually become Project Bell began forming during one of his late-night internet research sessions. He discovered that while there were numerous organizations focused on spinal cord injury research and rehabilitation, very few addressed the specific emotional and social needs of children adjusting to life with newly acquired disabilities. The technology existed to create more intuitive wheelchairs, better communication devices, and adaptive tools that could help children maintain independence and pursue their interests. But much of this innovation was either prohibitively expensive or simply unknown to families navigating the overwhelming landscape of medical care and insurance bureaucracy. What if Nexus Technologies could develop a division focused specifically on pediatric assistive technology? What if they could create devices that were not only functional but appealing to children? Tools that enhanced rather than limited their sense of possibility and adventure? The concept excited Cohen in a way that business hadn't since before the accident. This wasn't about profit margins or market dominance. This was about using his company's resources and expertise to address problems that affected real children living real challenges. He began having preliminary conversations with his research and development team, carefully explaining his vision for technology that could improve quality of life for children with disabilities. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Many of his engineers and designers were parents themselves, and the opportunity to work on projects with such clear humanitarian value energized them in ways that traditional software development had not. "We could start with wheelchair modifications," suggested Elena Rodriguez, his head of product development. "Smart navigation systems, customizable control interfaces, maybe even gaming integration that makes mobility more fun and engaging." "What about communication aids?" added Marcus Chen, a software engineer whose own nephew had autism. "Devices that help kids express themselves when traditional speech is difficult, but designed to look like toys or art supplies instead of medical equipment." The brainstorming sessions that followed were unlike any meetings Cohen had conducted in his previous career. Instead of focusing on quarterly earnings and competitive advantages, his team was discussing empathy, accessibility, and the transformative power of technology when applied to human need rather than corporate ambition. Maribelle became an enthusiastic consultant for the project, offering insights into what features would be most appealing to children and which design elements might feel stigmatizing or embarrassing. Her perspective was invaluable, providing the kind of authentic user feedback that no amount of market research could replicate. "The wheelchair should come in different colors," she suggested during one family dinner conversation about the project. "And maybe there could be places to attach art supplies or book holders. Oh, and what if it could play music? Not loud music that bothers other people, but maybe through special headphones that don't block out important sounds." Her ideas were creative, practical, and grounded in the real experience of navigating the world as a young person with mobility differences. Cohen found himself taking notes during their conversations, amazed by his daughter's insight and her growing confidence in expressing her opinions and preferences. As summer turned to autumn, the changes in both Maribelle and Cohen became increasingly evident to everyone who knew them. The girl who had spent months withdrawn and silent was now animated, curious, and actively engaged with her world. The father who had retreated from professional life in a haze of guilt and grief was rediscovering purpose and direction, though channeled toward goals that felt infinitely more meaningful than his previous achievements. The friendship with Elian and Josiah continued to flourish, providing a foundation of normalcy and joy that supported all the other positive changes occurring in their lives. Weekend adventures became a regular tradition, visits to local museums, hikes on accessible trails, fishing expeditions where Maribelle proved surprisingly adept at both casting techniques and fish identification. "She's got great instincts," Elian observed one afternoon as Maribelle successfully landed a rainbow trout that had been evading their efforts for over an hour. "Patient, focused, willing to try new approaches when the first one doesn't work. Those are valuable qualities for fishing and for life." The compliment was delivered casually, but Cohen recognized its significance. For months, adults had praised Maribelle for her bravery and strength in facing her challenges, qualities that, while admirable, seemed to define her primarily in relation to her disability. Elian's observation focused on character traits that existed independently of her accident: patience, focus, adaptability, qualities that would serve her well regardless of her physical circumstances. As Maribelle prepared to return to school for the spring semester, Cohen felt a mixture of pride and amazement at the transformation he had witnessed. His daughter was still using a wheelchair, still dealing with the daily realities of paralysis, still occasionally struggling with sadness or frustration about her changed circumstances. But she was no longer defined or limited by those challenges. She was Maribelle again, creative, funny, kind, intellectually curious, and socially engaged. The accident had changed how she moved through the world, but it hadn't changed who she was at her core. The night before her first day back at school, they sat together on the deck overlooking Pine Lake, a tradition that had been restored and now felt precious rather than painful. "Are you nervous?" Cohen asked, though her excitement about seeing friends and teachers had been evident for days. "A little," she admitted. "But mostly I'm excited. I want to show everyone the stories I've been writing, and the birdhouse Josiah and I built, and tell them about Project Belle. I think some of my classmates might have good ideas for the wheelchair designs." Her enthusiasm for sharing her experiences and including others in her projects reflected the confident, socially generous person she had always been. The accident had interrupted that aspect of her personality but hadn't eliminated it, and now it was emerging stronger than ever. "I'm proud of you," Cohen said, meaning it completely. "Not because you've overcome anything or been brave about anything, but because you're exactly who you've always been: kind, smart, creative, and interested in making the world better for everyone around you." Maribelle smiled, an expression of pure contentment that reminded Cohen why he had fallen in love with parenthood in the first place. "I'm proud of you too, Daddy," she said. "Project Belle is going to help so many kids. And you're much more fun now than you were when you spent all your time in meetings about boring computer stuff." Her observation made him laugh, but it also contained a truth he was still processing. Success, he was learning, had very little to do with corporate achievements or financial accumulation. It had to do with using your resources, skills, and opportunities to create positive change in the lives of people you cared about. The man who had once measured his worth by stock prices and market share was discovering that the most satisfying work of his life involved designing wheelchair accessories and communication devices for children he would probably never meet but whose lives might be made a little easier, a little more joyful, by technology developed with their specific needs and dreams in mind. 6 months later, Project Belle officially launched with a small ceremony at Nexus Technologies headquarters. The first product line included 3 innovative wheelchair modifications: a customizable control system that looked like a gaming device, modular storage attachments that could hold art supplies or books, and a discrete sound system that allowed music listening without isolation from environmental sounds. Each device had been tested and refined based on feedback from young users, including Maribelle, who had provided countless hours of consultation and enthusiasm for the project. Local news stations covered the launch, praising Cohen Whitlock's return to the business world with a focus on humanitarian technology. But the coverage that meant the most to Cohen was a simple article in the Winthrop Hollow Weekly, written by a reporter who understood that the real story wasn't about corporate innovation but about community, friendship, and the transformative power of being truly seen by another person. The article featured a photograph of Maribelle and Josiah working together on their latest collaborative story, surrounded by the adaptive art supplies that had been developed through Project Belle. They were laughing about something, completely absorbed in their creative process, 2 friends pursuing a shared passion without any consideration of the circumstances that had brought them together. In the background of the photograph, barely visible but unmistakably present, was Elian, quietly organizing supplies and creating the kind of supportive environment that allowed children to flourish. The caption read simply, "Local partnerships inspire innovation and friendship." But Cohen knew the real story was much more profound than that. It was about a single question: why is she alone? Asked by someone who possessed the rare combination of compassion and courage required to act on the answer. It was about a wedding reception that became a catalyst for transformation. A moment when barriers dissolved and possibilities expanded because one person chose to see beyond surface circumstances to the whole human being waiting to be recognized and included. It was about the discovery that healing doesn't always mean returning to what was, but sometimes means becoming something new and perhaps even better than what existed before. Most of all, it was about the truth that Elian had demonstrated with such quiet wisdom. Sometimes the most powerful force in the world isn't money or status or even love, though all of those things matter. Sometimes the most powerful force in the world is simply someone who chooses to see you, really see you, as exactly who you are, and then acts on that recognition with kindness, creativity, and hope. Years later, when people asked Cohen about the inspiration for Project Bell and his transition from traditional software development to assistive technology, he would tell them about a summer wedding in Winthrop Hollow, a carpenter named Elian Carter, and the simple question that changed everything. But he would always end the story the same way, with the observation that had become his guiding principle both as a father and as a business leader. The children no one sees are often the ones who have the most to teach us about joy, resilience, and the infinite possibilities that exist when we choose to include rather than exclude, to celebrate rather than pity, to dance rather than simply observe from the sidelines. And in every boardroom meeting that followed, in every product development session and strategic planning discussion, Cohen would begin with the same simple reminder. Let's talk about the kids no one sees. Because he had learned it, through his daughter's courage and a stranger's kindness, that visibility is a gift we give to each other, and that sometimes a single moment of genuine recognition can transform not just one life, but entire families, communities, and ultimately, the world itself. In Winthrop Hollow, where lilacs still sense the summer air and weddings still bring families together in celebration, people remember the afternoon when a simple question opened doorways that had seemed permanently closed, when a dance floor became a place of healing. And when three strangers became the kind of friends who remind us why community matters more than anything else we might achieve in isolation. They remember because some stories are too important to forget, and some moments of grace are too precious to let fade into the background noise of ordinary time. If you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever been the person sitting alone while others danced and celebrated around you, remember Maribelle's story. Remember that your worth isn't determined by your circumstances, your mobility, or your differences. You are valuable exactly as you are, and somewhere in this world is someone like Elian Carter, someone who will see you fully and ask the right question at exactly the right moment. And if you've never felt invisible, if you've always belonged easily to the dancing crowd, remember that you have the power to be that person for someone else. You have the ability to notice who's been overlooked, to ask the questions that need asking, and to extend invitations that could change the entire trajectory of another person's story. The dance floor is bigger than we think, and there's always room for one more person to join the celebration. Sometimes we just need someone brave enough to ask, and someone kind enough to say yes. Don't forget to like this video if Maribelle's story touched your heart. And subscribe to Everbell's Stories for more tales that remind us of the extraordinary power of ordinary human kindness. Share this story with someone who needs to remember that they are seen, valued, and worthy of inclusion in all of life's most beautiful moments. Because in the end, we're all just looking for our place in the dance, and the most beautiful music happens when everyone is invited to join in.